Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to do my February end of month wrap up. So this is going to cover everything that I read in the last 2 weeks of February. If you are curious as to what I read in the first 2 weeks, I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, Imaginary Numbers by Seanan McGuire, Across the Green Grass Fields by Seanan McGuire, The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole, The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nino, and then Library Wars Love and War Volumes 9 through 15 by Kiro Yumi. If you are interested in my thoughts on any of those, I will leave my mid-month wrap-up down below. But let's go ahead and jump in with what I read in the last 2 weeks. So the very first thing that I finished is From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find the Good Death by Caitlin Doughty. So this is really just Caitlin Doughty kind of going to various countries and observing the death rituals there and then relating them in this particular book. For those of you that don't know, Caitlin Doughty does have a YouTube channel. It is called Ask a Mortician. And this is very reminiscent of that YouTube channel. I think that if you like her videos, you'll probably like this book. Partially because her tone is very much there, like her humor and how she approaches things, but also generally the respect that she shows other cultures is just prevalent throughout her videos and prevalent throughout this book. The only thing where I thought it kind of got a little iffy was when she was talking about the Spanish customs that she observed, but only because I think my supposition is that she was not necessarily enamored with the fact that the Spanish death customs are very similar to American death customs, which she's very vocal that she does not like how America does death, essentially, that we don't really confront it. We don't really accept it. And so, but Spain is definitely at least one step beyond where America is. And she kind of comes to that conclusion at the end of the chapter. So I thought that that was okay. And it wasn't bad. It just kind of towed the line a little bit. But overall, I thought that it was generally very respectful, and I like the customs that we chose. I thought that they were a nice variety, and I didn't think that anything was chosen specifically to sensationalize it, right? I think that she just wanted a wide variety of death customs, and some of them happened to be very strange to American readers, and it would kind of be a little bit sensational, but she didn't necessarily sensationalize them. I thought that this was just a really good book, very much a continuation of the videos that I have seen, and I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. After that, I finished Sea Witch by Sarah Henning, and this is the first book in a duology. This is a young adult fantasy villain origin story for the Sea Witch from The Little Mermaid. Essentially, we are following our main character of Evie, and Evie is the daughter of the royal fisherman. So even though he's the royal fisherman, he's still a fisherman, so she is very low class. But her best friend is Nick, who happens to be the crown prince. Now, there used to be a third member of their little friendship trio, Anna. Only 4 years ago, Anna drowned in the ocean, and they have been trying to come to grips with their grief ever since. And then one day, Evie sees a girl walking along the shore who looks a lot like Anna. And Evie is so excited at the chance of having her friend back, but it becomes very clear that this girl has a lot of secrets. I have already done a full-length review for this, so I will try to keep this relatively brief, and I will leave my full-length review link down below. But I really liked this. I think that the world building was a little shaky at points, just with the setting, and I was a little sad that we didn't spend more time with the mermaids. And actually the magic system was so squishy, which you kind of expect from a fairy tale because, you know, fairy tales just generally have squishy magic. But it was so, it didn't work because at the end there was a point where we needed a few more rules, but we didn't have it. So that was not great. I really did like Evie as our main character. I was very definitely rooting for her, even knowing that she would probably fail on what she was trying to do, because this is a villain origin story. I liked the various characters in general, and I do think that some of the characters definitely, like, they're degrade into not great humans, let's say. And I think that that transition was handled extremely well. I liked the plot quite a bit. I think that a good villain origin story really contextualizes the interactions between the villain and the hero and gives you a new perspective. And this absolutely did that. When we got to the epilogue and we got to see the Sea Witch interacting with the Little Mermaid, taking her voice, everything, we just understand so much more about that interaction. And so I think that this really generally was done very well. And I ended up giving this 4.25 stars. After that, I read The Girl of Fire and Thorns by Ray Carson. This is the first book in the Girl of Fire and Thorns trilogy, which is a young adult fantasy trilogy. So in this one, we are following our main character of Alyssa. And Alyssa is a princess, and she has this prophecy that she's going to do something amazing. Nothing specific on what it's going to be, but she's going to do something amazing, guys. And everybody around her is trying really hard to harness that prophecy for themselves, whether it is the king that marries her in secret, to the savage enemies she's got who's trying to kidnap her, to this rebel group who kidnaps her and to use her for their own benefit. Now, and all Alyssa is trying to do is stay alive and figure out how to help her people. And you guys, I'm not going to lie, I was a little worried going into this because I have read this before, and I loved it. Gave it 5 stars, and I was just like, it's been so long, I didn't know if it was going to hold up or not. But I am happy to report that yes, it did. So first up, I liked Alyssa as a character. This story is really her growth, her development, growing into herself, and I just really enjoyed watching it. I liked that we did spend a small amount of time at the beginning characterizing Alyssa and where she is, but very quickly she starts asserting herself. She's not necessarily confident in herself, but she starts asserting herself in a way that she never had before, and seeing that actually it's okay, it works out just fine. And I like that she started doing that prior to when she was actually kidnapped by the rebels, because the rebels do force her to march through the desert on pretty slim rations. And the thing is, Alyssa, before that kidnapping, is fat. And going through having to do more physical exercise than she's probably ever done in her life, and eating less than she normally does, she lost a lot of weight, so I like that it was very realistic. And I also like that her confidence and her assertiveness is not tied to this change in her physical appearance. And actually, Ray Carson does have an author note at the back where she kind of details like how she tried to be very careful about doing this particular part of the story. So I did really appreciate the care that it was done with. Grammar. Anyway, so with the other characters, I really liked watching Alyssa and Rosario. Rosario is a 6-year-old prince, and I just really adored them together. There was another character who is not a villain nor really an antagonist, but not really somebody you like either. And I actually like how the author characterized him, because I felt so sympathetic towards this character, but at the same time I'm like, dude, you're wrong, you're just wrong, like I don't know what to tell you. So I just thought that was done really, really well. I loved the plot of this. It was slightly twisty turny. I think that if you're paying strict attention, you probably could guess how the ending is going to go. However, I was so engrossed in this book that I literally never stopped to think of how it was going to end, which is honestly like the highest praise I can give a book. I was so sucked in, I just wanted to keep going rather than speculate as to where we were going to go. But clearly I loved this, and I ended up giving this 5 stars. So after that, I finished Hamilton's Battalion, and this is a trio of historical romance novellas by Rose Lerner, Courtney, Milan, and Alyssa Cole. So the whole premise of this is that Mrs. Hamilton, after Alexander Hamilton's death, is trying to collect a bunch of stories from the soldiers that were in Hamilton's battalion. And so we start with the first story, and that is Promised Land. And this is, so we're following our main character of Rachel. And Rachel ran away from home to join the army, disguised as a man, obviously. And now in present day, she is a sergeant, and she happens to catch a British spy in camp. Only the British spy turns out to be her former love. And obviously he knows that she's actually female, and so things get very sticky very quickly. And this is obviously a second chance romance, which I just don't ever connect with. I don't like it. It's just not my thing. It was well written. It is probably one of the best written second chance romances that I have ever read. It's just, like I said, it's just not really my thing. The thing that I did find really interesting is that Rachel and her former lover are both Jewish, and that Jewishness is very much centered in this story. And I thought it was well done and very interesting. But overall, I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. The second novella is The Pursuit of by Courtney Milan. And in this, we're following Henry Latham, who is a British officer, and he finds himself at the mercy of John Hunter, who is a Black American soldier. And for whatever reasons, John decides to let him go, and Henry recognizes that he is now in John's debt and tracks him down and asks how he can repay John. And John, trying to get rid of him, basically says, hey, I'm heading out on a 500-mile walk tomorrow. You could accompany me. And Henry says, okay. And the story goes from there. So first thing I want to talk about is tonally, this is extremely different than the previous novella. So if you're reading this, take a moment to pause, breathe a little bit, reset your expectations, and then jump in, because it is very lighthearted, especially in the beginning. I will say the beginning didn't quite work for me, but once we got into the journey, I really, really liked this book. So first up, Henry has honestly, he's written in a way that just screams that he's neurodivergent, right? Like, I think that if you have ADHD, you'll definitely recognize yourself a bit in Henry. I'm not sure that that was the intent of the author, but there you go. But I really did appreciate how John learns how to interact effectively with Henry without trying to force Henry to be something he's not. I really, really appreciated that. The other thing that I thought was dealt with really well is that John is Black and they are traveling through America, which is super racist. And also Henry is white, and that, not only white, but very privileged. And so Henry definitely has some ideas that need to be challenged before the two of them can continue on with this relationship. And I think that it's done very well. Like, John's Blackness is not centered in this story in the same way that the Jewishness was centered in Promised Land, but it was something that was discussed and dealt with, and I really appreciated that. But generally speaking, I found this to be a very sweet story, and I liked this one the best, and I ended up giving it 3.75 stars. And then the last one is That Could Be Enough by Alyssa Cole, and we are following our main character of Mercy, who is one of Mrs. Hamilton's servants and has been recording a lot of these stories from the soldiers. And then one day, Andromeda Steele shows up to Mrs. Hamilton's door, and she is there to relay some of the stories on behalf of her grandfather, who is a little bit frail. And it is interest at first sight between Mercy and Andromeda, and the story kind of goes from there. Now, this is the novella that made me want to read this book, because I was trying Alyssa Cole's novellas. And so it's really sad that this is the one that I ended up liking the least. So the thing is, parts of it are really well written, but in the beginning, we definitely see the interest spark, the lust spark between these two characters. And at the end, we definitely see them come together in a nice way. But it's everything in the middle that isn't done well. It's not that it's missing necessarily, but we don't really get this sense that they are growing to be more interested in each other. It's just, I didn't feel the chemistry between them. I didn't feel it. And like, that's one of my favorite parts is when they're like getting to know each other. So I was very sad that this part was ended up missing. Um, and so for me overall, this just really didn't work as well as I wanted it to. And I ended up giving it 3.25 stars. So overall, this full novella ended up getting a rating of 3.5 stars. And one last thing I will mention is that each novella has exactly one sex scene that is steamy, but not necessarily graphic, and they are all pretty short. So after that, I finished Finna by Nino Cipri, and this is an adult science fiction novella, and we are following our main characters of Ava and Jules, and they work at a Swedish big box furniture store, except it's not that one that you're thinking of. It's a knockoff, and essentially a portal to another dimension opens up in the store and a customer wanders into it. And now Ava and Jules need to go after this customer and bring them back. Only Ava and Jules just recently broke up and they haven't really quite figured out how to be around each other yet. And the story goes from there. I loved this. This is like an epic adventure in miniature. I think that Nino Cipri had this really good sense of when to push on with the story and when to kind of take a step back and breathe and like just look around for a moment. And part of this is like just a really good attention to what details are really going to help push the book forward and which ones are totally fine to gloss over. I think that they ended up doing just a really excellent job with this. The only quibble that I had was a grammar one, and that is Ava uses she, her pronouns, and Jules uses they, them pronouns. And there were a couple times where there would be the start of a paragraph and it would say they, and I didn't know if it was singular they and referring to Jules or plural they and referring to Ava and Jules together. And so I definitely stumbled a couple times with that, and I don't know if that's just me or if it actually needed to be edited a little bit more. But that's all I have negative about this book. I just loved it so much. I even liked the ending, even though that was a little bit more open than I normally like. But I ended up giving this 4.5 stars. And the last thing that I have to share is Strange Fruit Volume 2, More Uncelebrated Narratives from Black History by Joel Christian Gill. And this is a graphic novel and it is nonfiction. It's exactly what it says. Stories from Black history you maybe haven't heard of before. I did not read Volume 1. I just happened to see this again on my Black History Month display at my library, so I picked it up to try it out. The pictures in here are fairly simplistic. The stories are told in a somewhat simplistic kind of way, but it is very effective in how it does this, especially because it's really just informing you of some of these stories, right? My favorites are, the first one was Jordan Anderson, who was a former slave who received a letter from his former master asking him to come back to work. And Jordan essentially pens this very dry wit kind of letter back, and at the end basically says, if you are being sincere, then you should pay me all my back wages owed, which amounts to $11,000. Which I'm just like, oh, that's so amazing. That's so good. And then the other one that I really liked was Victor Green, who wrote Green's book for The Negro Motorist, which is essentially a guide that was used after the Civil War, before the Civil Rights Movement, when there were a lot of places that were not safe for Black motorists to stop. So it was a guide to like how to avoid all the sundown towns, essentially. If you don't know what a sundown town is, it's essentially an all-white town that is not welcoming to anybody that is not white, but especially if the sun has gone down and you are still in town, you can expect violence. The best you can hope for is that the police pick you up and do nothing further. A lot of black motorists used to disappear. It's still a thing that happens today, but it was a much bigger problem back then. The only story that I did not like was Tom Wiggins, and it wasn't about the fact that he was included. It's just how it was presented. So it was said that Tom Wiggins was autistic, which is, it was likely he was autistic because autism wasn't diagnosed until 1943 after Tom Wiggins had already died. So I didn't like that assertion, but also I just didn't like how it was kind of handled in the story. It's not quite right. And so it did bother me. But otherwise, I think that this is a very interesting read, and it makes me want to pick up volume 1. I will say that this, in some ways, feels like a kid's book, but it's really not. A lot of it is going to be, it's not graphic or anything, but it is probably going to be over the heads of some kids. But I think middle grade or older will probably get quite a bit out of this. And like I said, it does make me want to pick up volume 1. And I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. But that is it, you guys. Those are all the things that I read in the second half of the month. Comment down below if you have read any of these, if you liked them. What did you read in the month of February? Let me know. But that is all I have. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!